Well, we're joined in the studio now by Dr. Nazreen from Hizb Tahrir and by Zulfi Bukhari, who's the head of the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. Welcome. For those people who aren't sure exactly what a caliphate is, Dr. Nawaz, would you explain that for us?
Sure. The caliphate is the Islamic system of governance, and it's based upon particular principles such as an elected ruler, accountable governance, rule of law is very important, independent judiciary, but it's a system that implements the Sharia upon a society. Also very important are rights for women, such as education, political rights, economic rights, and the fact that people of other faiths should be able to live and to be able to worship their own faith within that system as well. So it's the Islamic governance system really that implements the Sharia upon a society.
But in the world today, how practical do you think it is to establish something like this?
Well, you can see the massive change across the Muslim world today. I mean, the Indonesian conference as an example, 100,000 people attending, the largest conference supporting Khilafah in history, and also one of the largest conferences in the Muslim world as well over the last century. If you look to many studies and surveys, like the University of Maryland in April in the US published a report that said that 70% of people in the Muslim world support a strict application of Sharia and the unification of the Muslim countries into one state, i.e. the Caliphate state. So there's a massive support. It's not just realistic, it's really something which is inevitable. I think this is the challenge for Western nations, to understand how to coexist with the system.
Zulfi Bukhari, do you think it's inevitable?
I mean, that's for the Muslim world to decide whether they want it or not. I suppose the issue I have is, you mentioned the words democracy and all the rest of it, but these countries aren't democratic, and neither is HT. You guys have been opposed to democracy for a very, very long time. So if there was a decision to say, let's have a democracy, let's have a caliphate, let's have a khalifa, sorry, let me finish, then I'd actually ask, what's the mechanisms to get there, and how do you then protect that the system of accountability? So you can look at the Turkish model, which isn't or wasn't democratic, or you can look at the Saudi model, which is a tyranny.
Well, let me put it to you, that conference that we saw there in Lucy Williamson's report, presumably it would like to overturn Indonesia's democratically elected government.
Well, if you look at the Muslim world today, not just Indonesia, but across the Muslim world, we have tyrannical regimes that imprison grandmothers simply for opposing their corruption. We have regimes who have become yes boys to Western governments, allowing them to occupy Muslim countries and also interfere in the politics. Rulers which squander the wealth of the Muslim world and allow the resources of the Muslim countries to be siphoned off to Western companies. I mean, it's the Muslim people who want a system. They are the ones who want to remove these regimes and replace them with an accountable government, and replace them with a system that looks after their affairs.
Through democratic elections?
Well, you have to look at election. When we talk about democracy, I think we need to understand that it's not just Western liberalism that has a monopoly on elected rulership, on accountable government. The Islamic system has that as well. I think what's shown to not work in the Muslim world today is the imposition of Western democracy in the Muslim world through force, through the barrel of a gun. We see that in Iraq, we see that in Afghanistan, and across the Muslim world it's failed. So Muslims want to define their own future based on Islam.
Zulfi Bukhari, what Dr. Nawaz is saying, what Hizb Tahrir stands for, do you think that is counterproductive to the wishes of many other Muslims?
Well, I think that's something that we need to get some real detail on, i.e. if you're a Shia or somebody who doesn't believe in the same interpretation of the Quran that Hizb Tahrir would, what would happen to you in a Khalifa state? Also in a Khalifa state, who gives the right to Hizb Tahrir to be the Khalifa? So these questions need to be asked, but also this isn't a concept that Hizb Tahrir has developed. This is an Islamic concept. The issue is, though, that HT, by talking about it, almost tries to take monopoly of it, and then you need to ask yourself, well, nobody's elected these guys. What about that? Also, they're very anti-Western, and what they need to be is, if they don't like foreign policy, talk about foreign policy. But it's a lot more than that.
Let me ask you both, starting off with you, Zulfi Bukhari, would you have concerns about the rights of non-Muslims under a caliphate?
Well, as in the concept of a caliphate, no. But I would have a concern of minorities or differences of opinions under a Hizb Tahrir style caliphate. Yes.
Nazreen Nawaz, how would you protect the rights of non-Muslims under a caliphate?
Okay, non-Muslims within the Islamic system, there's a historical precedence of them being protected in terms of their worship, in terms of their places of worship, in terms of their issues of marriage and divorce. They are protected citizens within the state and equal citizens underneath the law in terms of access to justice. In fact, there are many historical examples within the Islamic society, civilization civilization of the past, where non-Muslims actually protected the Islamic system because of the rights that they received underneath the Caliphate state. And I think this is the issue. And I think Zulfikar said that this is not about Hizb ut-Tahrir. Hizb ut-Tahrir has always been linked to the issue of the Caliphate. This is the issue of what Muslims, this is the issue of what Muslims want in the Muslim world, and should they not be able to define their own political future, and the Caliphate, like Zulfikar said, is part of Orthodox. Hizb ut-Tahrir is simply one group which calls for the Caliphate, but this is a concept which is part of Orthodox Islam. It's always been, as you said, and therefore it's something which Muslims should be able to have, define their own future without interference from the West.
Dr. Nawaz, what do you say to those, some critics, who say that ideologically your group is close to the ideology of some jihadists?
This is a crazy argument. It's like a broken record that comes up again and again. It's like saying, for example, if I support animal rights, it's also laying a premise for those who support violence, people who use violence in the name of animal rights. It's a ridiculous argument. Hizb ut-Tahrir has never been associated with terrorism, has never advocated it, supported it. It's a political organization.
You want to see the establishment of a caliphate by purely peaceful means?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, this is the nature of, this is a strict method based upon Islam that we adopt.
Do you think that's possible, to establish it by purely peaceful means?
Well, I think that's for the people of whichever lands want to be part of the Caliphate to decide. And once they've said yes or no, that's their decision. It can't be imposed upon them. There can't be a certain flavour of it to come through and say, look, this is our version. The big issue that we have, though, is if it's not democratic, all it is just another form of tyranny, and then we'll get a Saudi version of Islam versus...
Can I just ask you one other question? Do you agree with Dr. Nawaz that Hizb ut-Tahrir is a peaceful organisation, a purely peaceful organisation?
They are a peaceful organisation. Their views, especially when it comes to being anti-Western, is something that I don't share.
I have to oppose that, this idea of being anti-Western. Yeah. The reality is that Islam has its own system and its own values.
It doesn't have to be anti-Western.
The reality is it's not just democracy that can produce good governance, and this is, I think, what we need to look at. We need to look at good governance, not just democracy. Good governance meaning elected ruler, accountable government, meaning a body that can advise the ruler, where there's transparency, and the Caliphate state, not only is that defined by the Islamic text, but also it has a historical precedence of having those principles.
I accept that, but you guys don't go down that road. What you guys do, and you talk to your members, because I do, I've got a very strong anti-Western approach about them, and their psyche is anti-Western, and they need to break that down.
That's a bit strange.
Are you saying that Muslims cannot be properly represented within certain states and countries?
If you look at the Muslim world today, no one is representing the Muslim countries today because of the fact that we have these dictatorships. How the Muslim rulers
in Indonesia,
across the Muslim world, if you look at Indonesia as an example, Indonesia is all defined as a secular progressive country, isn't it? That's how it's defined. But what you see is that why is it that even now you have the largest conference in Indonesia in support of the Caliphate state? Is because there's an increase in Islam, in religious values within Indonesia and also across the Muslim world, and a direction towards having Islam in governance. I think the problem and the instability happens is when Western nations try to interfere with that and put their own kind of agenda in those countries.
Is the bottom line not that your organisation, if it wants to achieve Muslim governance, must do so by democratic means?
Well, what do you mean by democracy? This is a thing.
By people voting, by the majority of people in a country voting.
If you're talking about the issue of elected ruler, absolutely. The Caliphate and Islam says you should have an elected ruler. If you're talking about being able to account the ruler and advise him, Islam has a consultative body, as an example, to do that. Islam has a different structure of ruling.
Elected for life.
Zulfi Bukhari, are you basically saying that there is no way that democratically this organisation can work?
This organisation is not a democratic organisation. They don't believe in democracy. I like some of the rhetorical contortions you've made about accountability. I think that's perfect. You guys need to say more of that. But it's not where you're coming from.
I think the question I would ask is whether democracy in itself is the only system where you can have an elected ruler. Democracy, we know, is a Western construct, but if you're talking about good governance, if you're talking about accountability, the people having the right to account the ruler, authority being in the hands of the people, it's not just democracy that has a monopoly on that, it's the Islamic system.
Last comment from you, Zulfi, please.
I accept that, but unless you believe in the system of democracy to get rid of leaders, then guess what? You're going down a dead end.
I am afraid
ideas.
we have run out of time, but thank you both very much for a very interesting discussion. Dr. Nazreen Nawaz from Hizb Tahrir and Zulfi Bukhari, head of the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.